And I just turned around and I hauled ass out of there. I was done. I wasn't dealing with that.
The hypocrisy of the cult is one of the things that turned me away the quickest.
When I turned my headlights on, it turned and looked at us, and one of the things I remember the most were the eyes were glowing red.
I see an orb of light. It is just circling these steps like it is waiting for me.
And he begins to tell them that he saw a UFO. They're basically like, what are you talking about? That's 7 foot up on a tree, peeking around it, and that's where I saw the top of the muzzle, nose, and the eyes. As soon as I made eye contact with this thing, it felt like death.
Welcome back to Tinfoil Tales. I'm your host, Brandon Wright. Tonight's episode, we're going to be joined by my guest, John. John is the host of Myth, Monsters, and Mullets. He reached out to me not too long ago to ask me if I'd ever heard about a story of a white wolf that kind of stalked around the Wabash River. I hadn't actually heard that story, but after we kind of got connected, John ended up having a weird sighting not too far from the Mississippi River. And anyone knowing me knows that that is a big hot spot for what I'm looking into for this documentary, the Mississippi Triangle. So definitely wanted to have John on here to dive into that. But before we bring him on, if you've ever had an experience and you'd like to be on an episode of Tinfoil Tales, there's a couple things you can do. You can either send an email to tinfoiltalespodcast@gmail.com, or you can go to tinfoiltales.com and go to the contact section. Just make sure to reach out and we will get something scheduled for a future episode. If you'd like to help the podcast out, please share it around. Word of mouth is one of the best ways to help the podcast grow. You can also leave a 5-star rating and review wherever you listen to Tinfoil Tales ads. So click the 5 stars and helps me fight the algorithms. You can become a member of the Patreon, get early access to all the episodes, and they're all ad-free. Some exclusive content over there, too. It's only $1.99 a month, so check out the show notes for more information. As I mentioned a little bit ago, I am working on a documentary called The Mississippi Triangle. So for anyone in this Miami County, Indiana area, or Wabash, Grant, any of those surrounding counties, if you've ever had an experience, make sure to reach out to me. I'd like to hear about it. That should be coming out later in 2025. There is a new live call-in show on the horizon. It'll be Tinfoil Tales presents Tinfoil Talks, live every Sunday night at 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. It'll be a live call-in show. So if you've got any experiences or anything you would like to talk about, make sure to call in. You can talk with me on the air. Make sure to follow around on all the social medias. We're going to go ahead now and bring John on and dive into the conversation. Definitely looking forward to talking with him. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. I'd like to take this time to welcome my guest tonight, John. Thanks for coming on here and talking to me.
Hey, no problem. Thanks for having me.
Hey, you're a local Indiana person. You reached out to me. You got your own little show like my little show. So, and then we were just kind of talking. Right after we kind of made a connection, you end up having this weird experience. So I want to say it's my curse. You just, you got in my little circle. So now you're going to start seeing the same weird crap that I have to see. But
I don't want to see this thing again.
Before we get into that, you want to let the audience know a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, my name's John. I run a show called Myths, Monsters, and Mullets. It's brand new pretty much. Just the last couple months. You can find it on YouTube and Spotify right now. Yeah, I kind of stumbled into this, you know. I had my own paranormal encounters and got me interested and got me going down the rabbit holes, and realized that I'd had other experiences before I was, if you want to call it, a believer. And yeah, that's pretty much it. And I grew up in Ohio, grew up on a horse farm, and I ended up moving to Indiana in 2020, and that's where I had my first encounter.
Do you want to, I'm going to leave this up to you. Do you want to talk about what got you into this, like with your first encounter, or do you want to talk about the most recent thing?
we'll touch on the first one because if I go into it's ghost stuff, and ghost stuff isn't really that interesting, I don't think, not compared to the cryptids and things like that. But so I started a new job. I'd lost my job during COVID and started a new job. And a couple of the guys that I worked with had done some small ghost hunts, things like that. And we decided that we were going to go investigate Randolph County Infirmary in Winchester. And we had a lot of stuff happen that night. We had a guy during an Estes experiment have an out-of-body experience. All kinds of EVPs. But I went in as a skeptic because I was open-minded to it because I did like watching the shows and the documentaries and things. But I wasn't completely convinced. You know, a lot of those shows, they hype things up and things like that. So while we were there, I did a little solo investigation, had some intelligent replies from some knocking. That got me thinking, okay, maybe there's something to this. And then later in the night, I actually had some poltergeist activity where a rock was thrown at me. And everybody is on camera at the time. And this rock comes out of the darkness and hits the cabinet next to my leg. So at that point, I'm like, okay, this is real. And that got me going down the rabbit hole. You know, if ghosts are real, what else is real? And I started listening to like Sasquatch Chronicles, things like that. And the first time I heard the Ohio Howl was on that show. And the hair on my arm stood up. Because like I mentioned before, I grew up on a horse farm and we camped and went horseback riding down in southern Ohio. And I had actually heard the Ohio Howl when I was probably 11 or 12 years old. And after listening to more and more of these encounters, I realized, holy crap, I had multiple possible Sasquatch encounters. So one of the first things that I remember ever happening, there's a trail, we called it Rattlesnake Ridge, and we called it that because they had done some logging alongside the trail, and all their leftovers they had just kind of piled up, and rattlesnakes had built dens in there. So we would see rattlesnakes in there. And right across from this log pile was a nice place to give our horses a break. We were riding down through there, and it was middle of summer. So when horses are when it's really hot, they want to move out very much. They just want to walk. But if you're familiar with horseback riding, horses will remember where you stop. You know, they're used to getting a break there. So this was a place we normally stopped, and as we come up on it, there was just this putrid smell. The typical wet dog, garbage, rotting meat smell. And we tried to pull our horses over into the shade, and they didn't want to stop. Like, they were doing circles, and like they didn't want to be there. So we rode on down the trail about, I don't know, maybe another mile. And then they finally, we got out of that smell, and they let us take a break. So, that was odd. I can't say that it was Sasquatch related, but it sounds a lot like what people report. Well, then there was another time, like I said, all this happened whenever I was a kid. So the adults would like to drink adult beverages while we were riding. And me being underage, I didn't partake. So there was one time they started drinking pretty early, and it was probably 11 o'clock, and the breaks kept getting longer and longer. So I was getting bored. Well, one of the women that was with us, she had a little too much to drink and needed to go back to camp. So I volunteered to take her back. And we're riding back. We'd been riding probably an hour and a half. And Tar Hollow State Park's it's down by Hocking Hills. So, it's pretty hilly, and, it's the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains. But, so, we're riding along, and we're getting ready to go up this hill, and it's a pretty steep hill. And I smell that same smell again. And the woman that was with me, she's like, "What the F is that?" And about that time, our horses just took off. Like they did not, like when you go up hills, you rein your horses in. You don't want them to trip. You don't want them to gas out before they get to the top of the hill or whatever. There was no holding back. Like I tried reining my horse in, and it was getting out of there. We get to the top of the hill, can't smell it anymore. And the horses are winded bad. So, if we forced them to stop, but the whole time they were looking back down the trail, like ears perked up, like they were trying to find something. And finally, after about 10 minutes, they calmed down and we were able to ride on. But it just seemed odd the way they acted, because normally, you start going up the hill, you rein them in, they slow down, but they wanted out of there. And it was that exact same smell that we had smelled up on Rattlesnake Ridge. So that was the two times I smelled something. We'd had a guy that rode with us. He had said that he had seen a Sasquatch down there. And I kind of feel bad now, because we all kind of made fun of him for saying that, he'd seen Sasquatch. But he had said that him and his dog he lived down in that area. So he would often ride through the park by himself. And he was going down this one trail, and he said he smelled something, and he looked off to the left down through this marshy area, and he said he saw it. He saw a Sasquatch over there, and his dog took off after it. And he finally was able to call his dog back, and he said it had like some kind of green slime on it. I don't know if it was from the marsh or whatever, but he was adamant that Bigfoot slimed his dog. But we all made fun of him. And now looking back, I'm like, he probably saw something. And this is back early 90s. I didn't even think Bigfoot existed in Ohio, if it existed at all, So, so like I said, when I started hearing all these encounters, I realized that there was two encounters I had. My grandparents had an old Winnebago motorhome, and me being 11, 12 years old, I had to sleep in the bunk above the captain's chairs. And so in the summertime, it got hot, there's no airflow up there. So a lot of times I would make a bed in the horse trailer on top of the bales of hay and sleep out there because it was cooler. Well, there was one night, I'm asleep, and I hear this thumping sound. And my first thought was, when horses are thirsty, they'll start pawing at the ground. And that was my first thought, that, okay, the horses are thirsty. If I don't get up and take them to get something to drink, I'm going to have to listen to this all night. So I grabbed my flashlight, and as soon as I turn it on, something takes off running towards the creek. And my initial thought was, that has to be the biggest freaking deer on the planet, because like it's crashing through the trees, and the creek down there by the horseman's camp is probably about 20 to 30 feet wide, and it's all flat sandstone in the bed of the creek. And I heard this thing take one step in that sandstone. So again, I was thinking it was a deer, jumped in the middle, jumped out. But it sounded like a car going through there. So I'm still thinking, I don't believe I'm not thinking Bigfoot. So I get up and I take the horses down to the creek, and they don't want to stay down there. They're going in circles. They're trying to get back up to the camp. And so I take them back up. And again, I just thought, oh, that was weird, But there was one night, Tar Hollow State Park, the Horseman's Camp, the closest town to it takes you about 20 minutes to drive to. And whenever I would sleep in the horse trailer, I'd always listen to the radio before I went to bed to make sure it wasn't going to rain, because our horse trailer was kind of like a stock trailer. It had the air vents or whatever on the side of it. And if it rained, I was getting wet. So I know I listened to the radio that night. But about 2:00 in the morning, I hear what sounded like tornado siren, but it wasn't long enough. Like, it's, like a tornado siren starts off low and it goes high.
Mm-hmm.
And it only lasted like 30 seconds. And then it cut off. And I sat there for a minute and I'm like, that doesn't sound right. About a minute or two later, it does it again. And I'm listening to this and I'm like, that's not even coming from Londonderry. It's from the wrong direction. The only thing in that direction was the middle of the park. So again, it only lasted about 30 seconds and it shut off for a minute or two. It happened a third time and I'm like, okay, I got to get up, because if there's a tornado, we're in a freaking mobile home, or a motor home. And I get up, and as I'm walking back in, I hear it one more time. I wake my grandparents up, and the reason I know it was 2:00 in the morning is because my grandpa was like, why are you waking me up at 2:00 in the morning? And we turn on the radio and there was nothing. No, there's clear skies all night. So, he's like, well, you must have dreamt it. Go back to bed. So I dismissed it. But then again, when I heard the recordings of the Ohio Owl, that's what I heard. I mean, it was just this tornado siren, but deeper, I guess, is the word I'm looking for. Not as shrill. And yeah, so yeah, that's what got me started into asking other people what they've heard and what they've experienced. Is once I started realizing that there's more out there than what we've been told.
How many years ago was this?
The Ohio Owl would have been in probably 93, 92, 92, somewhere around in there.
Okay. Yeah, that's I don't know when the Ohio recording was done.
91.
91?
Yeah. That was Matt Moneymaker that did that.
Yeah. That was his big thing with finding Bigfoot. And that's where
Yeah.
his claim to fame.
And I don't understand some of those shows because, like, if I'm hunting, I'm not out there yelling and screaming and banging on trees. You know, I want these things, you know, most of the encounters you hear are people just sitting out in the woods being natural. And these things are curious, you know. They come up to them, you know, they're not out there looking for them when they find them. You know what I'm saying?
I feel like if these things are out there and you're out there banging on a tree and you're out there making noises, they're going to know that you are not them.
Right.
But all you're doing is alerting them of where you're at.
Yep. I agree.
They're not going to come and investigate. They're just going to ignore you.
Now, I will say that we camp every summer. I still go over to the farm, and we got like a 120-acre farm over there, and quite a bit of it's wooded. So we go back there and we primitive camp. And a couple times I have played the Sierra sounds just for shits and giggles while we're out there. And it has an effect on nature. Like, you start hearing more animals, you start hearing more things moving around when you start playing those sounds. So I'm not saying Bigfoot's in the area. I'm just saying I think that there's something to those sounds because nature does react when you play them.
Mm-hmm.
So
I think,
so yeah, I mean that's my past paranormal encounters in a nutshell, I guess you would say.
the reason you'd reached out to me was over something you'd heard about a white wolf, wasn't it?
Yeah. So after our experience down at Randolph County, one of the older guys at work, he's the janitor. He started telling us about this story he was told when he was a kid, growing up in Bluffton, about the white wolf of the Wabash. And the way he remembered it was there was a Native American chief whose grave had been desecrated or something. And he would appear along the Wabash, basically like scaring people away from his grave or whatever. And I looked into it a little bit, and the closest thing I could find was there was something similar over in Lafayette. It wasn't quite the same story. But the thing that I was thinking is still along the Wabash.
Right.
You know? So I'm thinking maybe the story was passed down, you know, along the Wabash River and it got changed a little bit. But yeah, that was the reason I first contacted you, because when I realized you were from Peru, I'm like, well, maybe he's heard of this thing. So, but that's as far as I've gotten with it. It's, like I said, it was just a story somebody told me, and I really can't find a whole lot about it.
There's all sorts of those types of stories. That's why I rarely will talk about certain things, because doing what I've been doing, like trying to dig into the local lores, I keep being told all sorts of stuff from random people, but there's no background information other than that.
Right.
It's almost like the Hookman story. Like every town has a Hookman or urban legend or whatever. So for me, I always take 99% of everything that I hear with a grain of salt, because it's probably bullshit. I'm not saying
Yeah, I
let me say
mean, I like the guy, so I told him I would look into it, you know.
But for every person that tells it, the legend lives on because then someone else knows and they've heard it, and then it grows. So somewhere down the line, either someone fabricated a story up and then it's turned into this big legend, or for whatever reason, there was actually a hint of truth to it, and then it turned into what it did. So that's why I always say about 99% of it probably not true, but I always leave that 1% just in case it is.
Right. And that's one of the reasons I when I was picking a name for my show, I got some pushback on calling it myth, having myths in there. And I'm like, well, every myth there has to be some hint of truth to it. Now, whether the whole thing's true or not, there's usually something there's a little glimmer of truth in there.
Mm-hmm.
So, and the term myth has changed over time too, just by how people use it. Myths originally were, this is a fact, and over time it's become, well, now that means it's not true. So I'm leaving it as myths, monsters, and mullets.
Don't worry about what people have to say about your name.
Yeah.
At the end of the day,
Yeah.
if you enjoy it, that's all that matters. I get shit all the time for the name of Tinfoil Tales, mainly because the tinfoil part.
Right.
Because everyone says, oh, you're using that. It's like you're making fun of people. No, I'm not making fun of people. Like, literally, I've explained this enough, but for anyone new that hasn't understood why I named the show this, if you were to talk about a lot of the topics that get talked on this show, you're going to be labeled as probably a whack job. And
Yep.
the notorious way of calling someone out as a whack job, they're, oh, you're one of those conspiracy people, you're one of the believe in those crazy things, you probably wear a tinfoil hat.
Right.
So that is where the name came from, is the stuff that you talk about, the average person is going to say that you're crazy, most likely, and you wear a tinfoil hat. So these are tinfoil tales because that's the stories from people that would be called crazy by the average person. And I'm not saying they're crazy. I'm just saying that's what the average person would label them as.
Right. Right.
But
Yep.
explaining that to people, they're like, you're just making fun of everybody. No. If you ever listen to my show, I don't make fun of anybody.
Right.
So there's that. But I enjoy talking to local people because I feel like there's things that I can reference and they would actually understand it more than someone I'm talking to from wherever else. And geologically, they don't, or geography or whatever you want to call it, like they don't know the location. So with you being not super far from here, when I mentioned something about the area that I'm researching, you can kind of relate to where it is. And
Yeah.
you'd heard me on Tony's show, didn't you? Is that how you come across
Right.
the show? Yeah. And I didn't go into a whole lot of stuff on his show. I was going to, but we didn't get a chance to do it. He had stuff to do, and I had to drive back from Tennessee. But there was a lot more stuff that I was wanting to talk about that I never got the opportunity to. That's why I did my little Mississinawa Triangle episode.
Right.
This is something that I've been working on for a while. And it just so happens now, you just told me you saw something by the Mississinawa River. So my whole head goes, it's like, of course you did. Because everyone sees something along that freaking river. And I don't know if it's because of the fact that this whole area used to be Miami Indians and they all got slaughtered. Like if they didn't get forced to move, if they didn't move, they were basically murdered by the army. So this whole friggin' area, you had your Delaware Indians. That's why there's Delaware County. You had the Potawatomi. You had all these other tribes, and their lands were landlocked, like their areas. I found like these old maps south of the Wabash was the Delaware. along the Wabash and the Mississippi Wall was the Miami. They went all the way up to Fort Wayne. And then further north to them was all the Potawatomi. And there's some other ones over by the, like Gary area, up by the Michigan. I don't know the names of them were. But this whole area, why it's called Indiana, like this was all Native American land. So 200 plus years ago, the army comes through and starts just murdering all of them. So there's some weird, bad juju just from all the tragic shit that happened. But if you want to, you just sent me some photos of your vehicle, which no one's ever actually had any type of physical proof ever sent to me before. So you're the first one that actually showed me some sort of interaction with something they've seen. So I want to dive into this one.
No, I'm going to apologize now. This is only the third time I've told this in public. And it was the scariest thing I've ever seen.
Now,
so
this was very
my wife
recent,
and I,
right?
oh, was that?
This is very recent.
Yeah. It was November 30th, Saturday after Thanksgiving. My wife and I we'd spent the day Christmas shopping in Ohio. And we were driving back. It was about 7:00 at night. And my wife, she was on her phone doing a Walmart order or something. And so she's not paying attention. You're from Indiana. You understand this time of year, it's deer are all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
They're moving. So, I'm on alert for the deer, and I'm on 28 headed towards Deerfield. And there's a car that's probably it's hard to tell at night, but I would say 200 to 300 yards in front of me. And, I'm watching the car because, like I said, if you're from the country, you're watching for brake lights. You're watching to see if they swerve. See if something goes in between you and their tail lights. And I didn't see the car didn't do anything. Like the car in front of me didn't do anything. We're doing probably 60 mile an hour. And one second the road's clear. And then there was something in the road on the center line. And at first I couldn't tell what it was. I just saw something, and it was probably, when I first saw it, 50 to 75 yards in front of me. And it was gray. It was, I think the way I described it was the color of like cigarette ash. And as I got up on top of which this whole encounter only took maybe three seconds, but when you see something in the road, time kind of slows down, but I saw this. It looked like the upper body of a man from basically the belly button up, like from that area. And it looked like it was on its knuckles, like a bulldog, like its arms were, like it was supporting itself with its arms or with its knuckles. And at first, it was like So it's on the center line. Its body is facing towards me, but it had its head turned to its right. And as I got closer, it turned and looked at me. And it didn't have a mouth or a nose. No hair, no clothes on. The body looked like not like a bodybuilder, but like it was in shape, kind of muscular, but not overly muscular. But it had no mouth, no nose. And all I could see was like eye sockets. Like there was no eye shine, nothing. As we got a little closer, it made like a move towards my lane. So I swerved. And as I swerved with its left hand, it like lunged at the car. And when I swerved, my wife, looks up from her phone, and I was like, "Did you see that?" And she said, "No." I looked in the rear view, but it was dark. I couldn't tell if there was anything back there or not. I felt like overwhelming fear when I saw this thing. So I got out of there. I'm like, I got to get away from this thing. And I'm telling my wife what I saw. And she's like, "Do you want to go back?" And I'm like, "No, I don't want to go back." So I get home, and one of my friends is the host of Nevermore Hollows. I told you about him. First thing I did was I get a hold of him because I needed to talk to somebody that, one, I knew would believe me, and two, to try to calm me down. And he calls me right back with his co-host, and they start asking me all these questions. And one of the questions they asked was, "Did you hit it?" And I didn't feel anything or hear anything at the time. So after talking to them, they're like, "Hey, make sure you write all this stuff down so you don't forget anything." And I was shaking. It scared me that bad. So after I got off the phone with them, I went outside, smoked a cigarette, and I decided to go out and look at the vehicle because it made me think, maybe I did hit this thing. And I checked the front fender, and there was nothing. And then I saw it looks like fingerprints, like it swiped the side of the car. And I took the picture, and I come back in, and my wife saw me when I walked back in. She's like, "What's wrong?" And I told her, I was like, "It touched the car." So I took her out, and she saw it. And then I went out the next day to get pictures in the daylight, and I measured it. And if it was your fingers from forefinger to pinky would have been between 7 and 8 inches. But if you look at that picture, it looks like the third and the pinky finger are like close together. And I tried measuring my fingers, and the best I could do was 6. And that was with the fingers all the way spread out. So, I mean, I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility for a human, but it's much bigger than my hand. I can tell you that. So, I had somebody, after I told this encounter, I had somebody comment that it sounded like a Nalusa. And I had never heard of this before. So I started looking into it, and the description isn't exactly what I saw just reading it. Well, then I decided to have AI look up the description and generate a photo of it. And I sent you that one too.
Yeah.
And that was pretty freaking close, other than the mouth and the nose. And I think the picture that AI generated had eye shine. But other than that, yeah, it was pretty freaking close to what I saw.
It didn't have a mouth or nose, you said, that you could see.
It was like skin. Like there was, it wasn't like they're like holes. It was like, I don't know, like skin. Like there was,
The eyes, were they just solid black?
yeah, they look like a skull, like just like sunken in, or like it was that shape. But
I will.
as I've looked back on it, I thought maybe the eyes were sunken in, and just because of the way the headlights were hitting it, maybe it did have eyes. I don't know, but I didn't see any.
I have Photoshop, so I will take the image you sent me and I will remove some of those features, and then I'll send it back to you to see if it looks more like what you saw.
All right. I will say, whenever AI brought that picture up, like, and I've never been affected by anything like I have been from seeing this thing. And another reason that I think that this is what I saw is because one of the descriptions says in Native American lore that this creature affects your emotions. Like it makes you full of sorrow and fear. And that's probably the best way I can describe what I felt when I saw this thing.
Mm-hmm.
Because I don't cry often. And 3 times since seeing this and retelling this, I've shed a tear over it. So I'm doing better this time. I can say that.
I can see it's visibly upsetting, which I can relate to that, but it's, for anyone that's ever listened to the show long enough to know, I'm very monotoned, even flowed. I don't really get emotional, which I'm probably undiagnosed autistic or something on a spectrum, because I'm not a very emotional person. So, but I understand seeing something and it completely fucking with your whole reality, because it makes you start to question things, and it makes you.
I thought I was going crazy at the moment it happened, because yeah, I believe in this stuff. I have people come on my show and tell me about these different things that they've seen. But when it's staring you in the face, it's different,
It's completely different.
Yeah.
For me, I want to say, like, you can't tell someone you can 100% relate because it affects everyone differently. But you can relate to someone going through that experience because you've experienced something too. So
Yeah.
it affects everyone in their own way. I've never heard of something like this before, like the name. But for me, it sounds very similar to just the depiction of it. You've heard of other people refer to like there's been things like the pale crawler looking things, but they even like the Dover demons. How big was this thing though? You said the hands were a really big part to it.
Which I never saw that. Like the whole time I saw the creature, it was on its knuckles. So I never actually saw its hands open. But this thing on its knuckles like that was every bit as, I mean, it was to the hood of the, we've got an Xterra. I mean, the head was at the hood. So what, 4 feet just on its knuckles. And I couldn't see. That was the other thing. When I first described this to Chris and Alan, I said it kind of felt like it was crawling out of the ground, but it could have just been like dragging its back end, and I couldn't see it because of the position. I don't know.
Do you,
I don't know.
it could have been, I don't want to say, I don't want to keep going the route that a lot of people tend to go down, but do you think it was manifesting itself into our reality? Like it was still taking its shape. So it wasn't at full form yet.
It could have been. It could have been. I don't know. I don't know. Like I said, 1 second it was not there, and 1 second it was. I didn't like. I started to use the word materialize, but when I think materialize, I think like on Star Trek, like the transporter type thing. But
Yeah.
it was just like it blinked, like it was there. It's and at first, the first thing that came to mind was a rake, but
That's basically like the pale crawler.
yeah, but all the description I hear of that is more thin, and this thing looked healthy, I guess you would say. I mean,
Thicker.
it had muscle definition, and yeah, like it didn't look, what's the word I'm looking for? Emaciated. It didn't look emaciated. It looked healthy, other than no mouth and no nose, but
When
it didn't have any hair. I didn't see ears, but that's not to say it didn't have them. It just happened so fast. I was so focused on the eyes that I don't know. I don't know. Yeah, that's
Weird question, but do you feel like this happened because of what you're doing?
yeah, I do, because I really, we're going to go kind of into the woo a little bit, but
Where I live,
I do feel like there is some kind of, if you want to call it a spiritual battle, maybe, where these things don't want, they don't want us to know about them. And I think people that talk about these things, they try to scare them out of doing it. Like, I don't know. I do feel like it was trying to keep me from getting the truth out there. Just my personal feelings on that, or it could have just been, I saw something that I shouldn't have seen. I don't know.
I was warned this when I first started doing the show, and I've mentioned it on other episodes, but someone random on Facebook told me they worry about me and my family. I'd only been doing it for like a month at this point. And I'm like, why? And they quoted Nietzsche or whatever the hell it is, but like says when you start looking into these things, sometimes they start looking back. And I've heard it multiple times from on other shows, other people talking. Some of these entities, whatever they are, energies, spirits, they notice you because you've noticed them.
Yeah.
Because you've noticed them, now they're going to make themselves more attracted to you because you've paid attention to them. I don't know what they are. I don't know where they're from, anything about it, but I do know I think there is some truth to that, because when you start to look into this type of stuff, you start noticing more things, because is it opening up your proverbial third eye or whatever? You just are able to start seeing things more than what the average person would write off.
I agree. I agree. And like I said, or like you said, I've heard other people say that too. And, you know, maybe it's being naive or whatever. I thought, you know, well, it's not going to happen to me, but it did. And, but I think if the intended message was for me to stop what I'm doing, I'm too stubborn for that, because now it makes me want to push harder. Like, people need to know that this stuff is real. And if that takes me continuing to do this show, that's what I'm going to do.
I think that is, I don't necessarily know if they're deterrents. I'm trying to look at things from a different perspective, and I know this will rub people the wrong way, but I interviewed a lady a while back, and the episode came out, and she claimed that she used to be a demon. And I got a lot of crap from people about that. But there were some aspects to her story that made me kind of wonder about stuff. They don't refer to themselves as demons in that sense. They think they're gods. So if these things think they're their own gods, and I've talked to other people that have talked about this too, like, what makes them think they're a god? What do they want? They want that recognition. They want that attention. They want something like that. So if something's out there and then you paid attention to it, you've seen it, and now it's gotten into your head to where it's affecting you, you're giving it that attention. You're giving it what it wants. You're feeding into it. So now other ones are going to come around because they want that attention too. You're feeding whatever it is that they're wanting. And that's why people are always saying stop doing what you're doing, because you're giving into the demons and everything. Everything's demons to people. But what if what we were calling demons, and what if what we're calling all these other things, are just these low frequency feeding whatever? And they want that attention. They want the upset from you. They want the fear. Because that's something that they need and to feed on. And by us talking about this stuff, by us getting upset about this, by us doing with the dumb shit that I'm doing, like going out looking for this stuff, we're giving it that attention.
Right.
So that is why people don't do it. Don't do this. You shouldn't do the don't do. We're feeding these things the attention that they're telling us not to give it to them. So I don't necessarily think these things don't want to be seen. I just don't think that they're capable of being seen until someone is open to being able to see them. If that makes any sort of sense.
Yeah. Yeah, it does make sense. I hadn't looked at it that way, but yeah, I mean, that's very possible.
I have no idea what the hell I'm talking about 99% of the time. So anyone out there listening, I'm not an expert. I don't ever say to be an expert. I never will call myself an expert. This is just where my brain goes. And I think that, to me, this is what I think. What I think doesn't mean anything. I'm just a guy with a microphone.
Yeah. Anybody who calls themselves an expert, they're not. Because if there were experts on it, we'd already be studying it in books. And, you know,
if you have to go around and tell people you're an expert, you're usually not an expert.
people already know who you are.
My last interview, that was actually brought up about something too during the interview. The guy said something and I said the same thing. I was like, if you have to tell people you're an expert, More than likely you're not, because if you are considered an expert, the people around you would already know that and they would consider you the expert. You don't have to tell people that's what you are.
Right.
It's like stroking your own ego that I'm an expert in something that's not even proved to exist. Okay. I'm an expert in bullshit. So there's that.
Yeah. So to get back to the whole Native American thing, after I started looking into this Nalusa thing, and this goes back to what you were talking about earlier. Right outside, well, first, where I had my encounter, I had just crossed a creek that feeds the Mississinawa. Mississinawa is maybe a quarter mile from where I had the encounter. There are burial mounds in this area.
Mm-hmm.
There's one that took me some digging to find. It's less than 9 miles from there, right along the Mississinawa. It's on private property, so you can't get to it. So it's not on Google Maps or anything, but I was able to track it down. But actually, there's an English graveyard on top of the burial mound. So you've got basically a desecrated mound in the area. I'm sure you've heard of Fritz Zimmerman.
Name sounds familiar.
He's got, I think it's called the I forget what it's called, but it's all about the mounds, the mound builders. That's what he studied. And he was able to find like 90 something burial mounds in Indiana and Ohio. And one of the burial mounds here in Jay County, it's reported that they found oversized skeletons in the mound. And one of the skeletons was holding the shriveled remains of a child's hand or something like that. But this is all, there's 3 burial mounds within 10, 15 miles of where I had my encounter. The boundary line for when the Battle of Fort Recovery happened, that runs right through this area. This whole area was the front lines of the, English and Native American battles, So there's all kinds of bloodshed in this whole area. And then you put in the fact that you talk about the Wabash. The Wabash starts just north of me. And it ran through, it's called Limberlost Swamp. They drained that swamp in the early 1900s. And from what I can understand, the swamp was, I don't know if you want to call it sacred to the Miami Indians, but they drained it to create farmland. So it's hard telling when all these farms were made, what other sites were destroyed. And, we're still talking about Mississippi and Wabash rivers. All this water is flowing right to you from this area. So,
and then not even,
I'm still looking into it. Like I said, this has only been 3 weeks since this happened, and I'm still trying to dig into this stuff. Finding a lot of weird stuff in this area.
Yeah.
So.
I'm just a few miles from where the Mississippi and the Wabash connect. And I live very close to the Eel River. And if you go down a couple more miles, like more towards Logansport, the Eel and the Wabash connect. So I'm in the middle of all of that. Like all of these 3 rivers meeting each other.
The Salamone River feeds into the Wabash, and that runs right through here too.
Yeah. And then
so
I call it the Mississinawa Triangle, but that's just because I plotted points from some sightings or whatever, and I noticed that it kind of made, if you follow the encounter, the next encounter, the next encounter, where I put these little dots on this map, I was like, that's a straight line. You go from that point down to this one, that's another one. And I go from back and over here. I was like, holy shit. It made like anyone can make a triangle though. I'm not saying like this is intentionally a triangle. It's just a term that gets tossed out for anything weird and paranormal. It's kind of a cliche, trendy thing at this point to call something that. But the Salamone has a lot of weird stuff too. I think I even mentioned it before, like back in August, I rented a boat for my buddy's bachelor party. We were out on a pontoon. The first thing they told us is we couldn't go to Monument Island. So that's the first place I drove that damn boat to. And I don't know why you can't go there, but it's got all these warning signs from the Army Corps of Engineers that you can't get off and dock or anything on this little island. I was like, why? Like, now I want to know why I can't go there. What's so special about this little piece of land in the middle of a lake? And it's just where the old city used to be, which is funny because under the Mississippi Wall, there used to be the original Somerset, and they flooded it over too, and they relocated it. So,
that's another thing too. I mean, land between the lakes.
mm-hmm.
You know, all these towns got submerged, and there's all kinds of paranormal stuff reported there. You know, there's a theme that repeats every time that you see where, well, we're just going to build a dam here. You know, why?
What are they trying to cap off? Now, I just learned this recently because I never thought about it in the sense of until I started digging into stuff. I thought it was weird beforehand that the Army Corps of Engineers was always the ones that are involved with building these dams, and they're the ones that maintain it. Why is the Army the ones that deal with the dams? Who were the ones that came through originally and took over the land and wiped out the Native Americans? The Army.
Yeah. Yeah.
So why are they still there making sure that everything's running properly for this dam? I get it's a like natural resource thing. They have to have it maintained or whatever, but why is it the Army's job to do that?
That's a good question.
Like I said, I never thought, I knew the Army was involved. I never went down the rabbit hole of why the Army, considering the history of what the Army had done 200 plus years ago now to the original native people that were here.
The only thing I could see on that would be federal government is doing the work, and I mean, you've got labor with the Army doing it. That'd be the only thing I could see.
They contracted out though.
Yeah.
So
they do that a lot more now than they used to, though. It wasn't so much contract work. It was, we've got these guys that can do it, you know?
Mm-hmm. Now I've looked into stuff, and it falls in line to kind of in the background of what I do for professional stuff. Because truth be told, I'm not a professional podcaster. People listening, like, this isn't my job. But my normal job, my 9 to 5 or whatever it ends up being, sometimes 16-hour job, is construction. I oversee highway construction. I'm basically like a project engineer. I just don't have the engineering degree. So for me, I understand all these concepts and everything. I understand how everything works, but very rarely have I ever had to interact with the Army Corps of Engineers on anything. We do federal highway. We do stuff like that, and they're not usually the ones involved. And I don't know if it's just structurally because it's something bridge related.
So I was getting ready to say, I know they do a lot of the basically flood control, you know, along the Mississippi River and the Ohio River, you know, that they build all those, all the dams and all the, what's the word I'm looking for? Yeah, those things that hold back the floodwaters on the rivers. And that they were involved in all that, all the way up and down Mississippi. And I lived in Louisiana for a while. It was the same thing. There's flood walls. Um, they were all built by the Army Corps of Engineers. So yeah, has
Oh,
something to do with water.
which again, we were just talking about water seems to be the weird concept here because from what I was told, they built the Mississippi on top of these natural springs, these natural well systems, and that's why every so many years the Mississippi has to continue to be fixed because the bottom of it keeps washing out. And I know that's true because they just fixed it like probably, I know it was going on about 20 years ago. Like every so many years, it starts to uproot itself. It starts to wash
Right.
out. So they have to keep redoing all this stuff to keep fixing it. So if that was the case, it was a piss poor design and planning of the why you'd put it there if you're going to always have to continue to keep working on it, unless you put it there to cap something, which is what
Yeah.
the story was. They did it to cap off these natural springs. But that whole area was supposedly the mystical places for the Miami Indians. And I was told I'm going to be interviewing someone from the actual tribe. Like I did get permission from that. So I'll find out more of their, he had to speak with the elders and get permission to come on here and talk about a lot of the stuff that is tossed out there. So I don't want to continue to say things that could be completely not true. But I was told by other people that prior to the army and everything, they used to do, we would call it today, modernized as witchcraft. Back then, that's not what it was to them. It was just their natural ways, spiritual ways. Today, we call it spiritual warfare. But they were warring with other tribes, even different clans of the Miami. And they would summon these spirit protectors. And they would do all sorts of things to around here, and like they'd do their little curse to this and that. And they would, a lot of it was also to do with water. How true is that? I have no idea. But that is some of the things that I've kicked over and been told about is, and there's supposedly a book about some of this stuff. I need to locate that book. But if that was some of the things that was going on hundreds of years ago, who's to say that some of the remnants of that still isn't soaked up here in the lands? How far away from, you said it was by the river. How far away from the river was it?
Oh, quarter, maybe a half mile.
Mm-hmm.
But I just literally crossed, I think it's called Miller Creek. As I was going across the bridge is when I saw this thing, and that creek feeds into the Mississippi.
Water is considered a very big conduit for paranormal activity.
Yep.
It's an energy. It's constantly moving, constantly. Like we use it for electricity. That's how they generate certain things. So if we're able to do that ourselves, why isn't something in the spiritual realm that needs something like that able to channel it too? Because
I agree.
I think the water in the area of the lands and all the old stuff, there's a very big reason why this all happens around here. Because geologically, this is just cornfield area. Like there's no mountains, there's no big forests, there's not a whole lot of anything besides flat fields. But if you start to map it out like I've been doing, there is so much weird stuff going on in just a small little area compared to the rest of the state.
Yeah.
Why is that? And again, most of the highest activity of weird sightings, not just cryptids, but UFO sightings, encounters with paranormal stuff, weird, anything is very, very close to a water source. And I know people can say, well, most society is built around water sources. Yes and no, not here. Not in some of these spots, because some of these spots where people see all this stuff, there is like this rural area. It's like not in a town. But the stuff that I was filming today, we were literally in town. I was getting drone footage which, considering all the weird stuff going on with drones, surprised it didn't get shot out of the sky. But we were going down the river and getting some drone footage for this documentary. And the area that I was at was this area where they supposedly had seen multiple werewolves. Again, I'm not someone that believes in werewolves, but I also saw something that most people would consider freaking werewolf. So, what is going on here? Like, there's just
the whole werewolf story. I mean, is that just a misidentification of the dogman? You know, they see something that's walks like a man but has the head of a dog. Well, they must have turned into that, you know.
right.
So I mean, there, like I said, it goes back to that. There's always a smidgen of truth in these myths and this lore, and it could be, you know, I mean, they talk about dog-headed people all throughout history. You know, it's not just a new phenomenon that started in Michigan. You know,
That depends on who you talk to. The term dogman, yes, started from that
Correct.
there, but the lore itself, and I've said that it's like it goes back thousands of years. It's
Yes.
not just a recent thing. The dogman song and the jokes from that, yes, that's what coined the term in modern society, but they used to be called werewolves. Like, here's another thing. And I don't remember if I talked about this on my other episode, but one of the areas that there's actually, it was a week ago Thursday. So it was right around the time you had your encounter. Someone had seen a Bigfoot over by La Fountain. And it was just like 2 weeks ago. It wasn't even that long ago. And they reported it because I've seen it on the mapping projects. I've been checking that recently because I'm mapping out locations where people have had reports at, which again, over by La Fountain is where the the War of 1812 memorial is. It's where they used to do the battleground reenactments, and it's where where it first started at first. So that's where they got all the grave sites for the army people and stuff. And then you go to the Native American side, they just have a plaque because they didn't know their name. They didn't care about them.
Right.
So that is in that general area. And like a couple of miles from there is where someone just recently seen a Bigfoot. And I've had two different people tell me that they've seen Bigfoot over at that battleground area. So if you go along that battleground, is literally along the Mississinawa River. But the town of La Fountain, or La Fontaine is how it would be pronounced in French, that whole area was a French area. And if you look back in the history, the French and English were kind of having like the wars with the Indians back then too, because that's what was going on. So that little town was settled by the French. And the French people had their stories of the loup-garou, which is considered what? A werewolf.
Werewolf, yeah.
So the stories in that area, they talked about the loup-garou in an area that supposedly has stories of wolf people. Which again goes back to where the tribes claim they summon these wolf spirits to protect their lands against their enemies. So,
Which kind of goes back to what I'd heard about that white wolf too. Was that this wolf spirit was there to protect this chief's gravesite or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Tecumseh or whatever, was that his name? I know he was.
He couldn't remember all he said was an Indian chief. That's all he said.
I know Tecumseh is a name that gets tossed around. I don't think he was anything with the Miami, but I think he might have been one of the bigger tribes because I think all the tribes kind of got together to go against the army.
Yeah.
But they all still got put on the Trail of Tears and shipped out to Oklahoma.
Yeah.
Or murdered. You either leave or die. Well, there's your options. Which
right.
Crazy times. But.
Yeah. Yep.
Well, is there anything else you'd like to talk about? I don't like to talk over people all the time, but I kind of, with you being local, knowing the area, we've kind of talked back and forth. So I was more conversing in this episode than I usually am. I usually just let the guest talk. But
Well, I like the back and forth because that's how I run my show. So I do like the back and forth. So
I do enjoy doing the back and forth, but a lot of the time I try just to let the audience listen to the guest. I don't want to make the show about myself. So
yeah,
that's how there's a lot of shows that the host does a lot of talking, and I'm the kind of person that wants to be in the background and just observe and listen and learn. I don't want to have all the attention on myself.
maybe I have a little bit of ADHD because I have to ask a question as soon as it comes in my head or I'll forget it.
I try and make mental notes, and then sometimes I just go brain fart and forget what I'm saying.
I've always got my notepad, but then there's just times where it's like it just falls out of my mouth. Like I've got to ask this question right now.
Okay. Well, I would like for you to let everyone know again where they can get a hold of you and listen to your show and everything about it.
The easiest way to find me is on YouTube at Myths, Monsters, and Mullets. If you want to join the live show, there's a link in the description of my channel to take you to my TikTok page. It's where all my lives are done. Eventually, that'll be transferring over to YouTube. On YouTube, it's John C.H. Methenkamp. It's too much to try to remember, but if you go to my YouTube channel, you'll find me. You can contact me at mythsandmullets@gmail.com, and you can find me on Spotify.
If you send me an email with the links in it, I'll make sure to put that in the show notes.
I will do that.
If you're out there listening, I might bump this episode up. So if you're hearing this now, this is one of the ones that I kind of moved ahead of some of the other ones because I kind of feel like it needs to get out there a little bit quicker than some of the other people's. No offense to anyone listening or the other guest. But, well, John, it's been a pleasure.
I enjoyed it.
Yeah. For anyone out there listening, thanks for listening, and we'll check you on the next one. And that's the show, everyone. I really hope you guys enjoyed the conversations. If you would like to be a guest on Tinfoil Tales, remember to send an email to tinfoiltalespodcast@gmail.com or go to the contact section of tinfoiltales.com. Just get your message to me. We'll get something scheduled for a future episode. And just remember, the truth lies in the stories we share, the connections we make. Stay curious, stay open-minded. Thank you all for joining us on this journey. And until next time, keep questioning, keep seeking, and keep exploring the unknown. Good night, everyone.
Tinfoil Tales in the headphones. Yeah, it's time to rock. Got a story about a cryptic creature. Let's take a walk. Bigfoot, dogman, they're out there in the dark. But the truth is out there like an neon spark. UFO sightings got the whole world shook. Conspiracies unfold like a story in a book. Media control, trying to keep us blind. But I won't be fooled, gonna use my own mind. In history, they don't want us to know the secrets they hide, the truth they won't show. Domain of society, they keep us in chains. When standing tall, it's time to break the reins. Control, trying to keep us blind. But I won't be fooled, gonna use my own mind. In history, they don't want us to know